The sky burned in shades of orange and violet as the sun sank behind the jagged hills. Dust rode the wind, whispering through the empty corral, rattling the shutters on the bunkhouse. Ethan Cole sat on the front porch of his ranch, the rough wood creaking beneath his boots, a folded letter balanced between his fingers. He had read it so many times that the paper had grown soft, edges worn thin, but still he traced the words like a man afraid they might vanish. Each line carried promise, company, warmth, maybe even love. For years he had lived alone with the cattle and the silence, his only companions the groan of the windmill and the cry of coyotes beyond the fence line. Loneliness was a heavy thing. It pressed on his chest during long nights, hollowed out his mornings until even the chores felt meaningless. He had endured drought, blizzards, even rustlers, but solitude gnawed at him more than hardship. It had been nearly a decade since he had spoken tenderly to anyone, and that gap felt deeper than any canyon. The letter spoke of a woman named Clara. Her handwriting was careful, each word deliberate, like she had measured the weight of her own worth before setting pen to paper. She promised kindness, loyalty, and a heart eager to build a home. Ethan remembered how his hand trembled when he sent his reply, sealing it with more hope than sense. He had written about his ranch, his cattle, the small garden that stubbornly yielded corn and beans. He told her of the wide skies, the endless land, and how it needed more than one pair of hands. But what he wanted, what he could not bring himself to write, was that he needed more than one soul. The fire in the hearth crackled, shadows dancing across the walls behind him. He took a sip from his tin cup of coffee, bitter and cold, but it kept him awake. Tomorrow she was supposed to arrive. A wagon train passing through would leave her at the depot, just a few miles from here. Tomorrow his life might finally shift. Ethan's thoughts strayed to his past, unbidden. He saw again the fever that swept his parents from their small farm, leaving him with nothing but debts and a pair of calloused hands. He remembered the winters when his younger brother wasted away from coughing, and the long days when neighbors offered pity but no help. He had buried too many dreams under the hard-packed soil of this land. His heart had grown stubborn, but not dead. The idea of a wife, of laughter in these empty rooms, of children's footsteps on these floors, was the ember he kept alive. He stood, stretching the ache from his back, and stepped down from the porch. The ranch stretched quiet before him, lit by a fading glow. Fence posts leaned, needing mending. A water trough stood low. These things could wait. What mattered was tomorrow. He pictured Clara's face, though he had never seen it. In his mind, she was small, gentle, perhaps timid but grateful. He had imagined her stepping into his life like a soft breeze filling a stale room. A faint sound reached him, the distant jingle of spurs and laughter from town. They were talking about him again, no doubt. The rancher, too lonesome to find a woman nearby, forced to buy himself a bride from halfway across the country. He had heard the jokes at the saloon, the cruel laughter. It stung, but not enough to stop him. Pride was cheap. Companionship was priceless. The night deepened. Stars pricked through the velvet sky, countless and cold. Ethan leaned against the corral fence, arms crossed, and whispered a silent prayer that Clara would come, that she would be everything the letter promised, that maybe, at last, he would no longer eat supper alone. Sleep did not come easy. When dawn finally broke, streaking the horizon with gold, Ethan was already saddling his horse. The leather creaked beneath his hands, and the familiar scent of oiled tack filled his nose. He rode out across the dusty trail, each hoofbeat steady and final, carrying him closer to the station where the wagon would arrive. By the time he reached town, the place was already stirring. The blacksmith hammered at his anvil, a dog barked at passing wagons, and the saloon doors swung open with the morning's first laughter. Heads turned as Ethan tied his horse outside the depot. Whispers passed quick, but he ignored them. His chest was tight, his palms damp against his trousers. The stage rumbled into view in a cloud of dust, wheels clattering against the rutted road. It slowed, horses snorting and stamping as the driver hauled back on the reins. The crowd pressed closer, eager for entertainment. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. This was it. His life was about to change. The driver climbed down, wiping sweat from his brow, and swung open the wagon door. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a shape filled the doorway. Ethan squinted against the sun, anticipation clawing through him. A boot touched the dirt, then another. The woman who stepped down was tall, broad-shouldered, her frame casting a long shadow across the ground. Dust clung to her patched dress. Her hands were rough, scarred, the hands of someone who had worked harder than most men. The townsfolk snickered, some outright laughed. Ethan's breath caught. This was not the delicate woman from his imagination, not the gentle picture he had clung to by the fire. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with eyes steady and unflinching, eyes that carried storms and strength both. For an instant, silence stretched between them, heavy as iron. Ethan swallowed hard, the letter crumpled in his pocket like a cruel joke. The crowd waited, murmuring, hungry for his reaction. This was Clara, his mail-order bride. And she was nothing like he had expected. The silence that followed her arrival was louder than any jeer from the onlookers. Ethan felt the weight of every eye in town pressing against his back, waiting to see whether he would claim the stranger who had stepped off the wagon. Clara adjusted her grip on a small canvas satchel, her posture unbending, her gaze level. She looked less like a bride and more like someone arriving to collect a debt. Ethan forced his boots to move forward, though each step felt heavy. When he finally stood before her, he tipped his hat, his voice rough with hesitation. "You must be Clara." She gave the smallest nod, her jaw set. "I am." Her voice carried a firmness that silenced the nearest whispers. The driver tossed down a trunk, its hinges squealing as it hit the dirt. Clara bent to lift it, and Ethan instinctively reached to help. She brushed his hand aside without a word and hoisted the trunk with ease that startled him. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A man near the saloon door laughed outright, muttering something about Ethan marrying a mule in a dress. Ethan's ears burned, but Clara didn't flinch. She simply walked past the gawkers, the trunk balanced against her hip as if it weighed nothing at all. Ethan hurried to catch up, leading her to his horse. He felt clumsy, unsure whether to offer the reins or the saddle. Clara studied the animal, then swung herself up with the grace of someone who had been riding most of her life. The sight stirred something unexpected in him, admiration wrapped in unease. They rode in silence, the town shrinking behind them, laughter echoing faintly until the prairie swallowed it whole. Ethan stole glances at her, noting the lines around her mouth, the strength in her shoulders, the way her eyes never lingered on one thing too long. She was alert, restless, a woman accustomed to watching her own back. Finally, he broke the silence. "The letters, they didn't say much about you." Clara's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "Some truths don't fit in ink. Paper can only hold so much." He didn't press. Something in her tone warned him away. Instead, he studied her hands resting on the reins, scarred, the nails blunt and uneven, not the hands of someone unfamiliar with hardship. He wondered what kind of life had carved them into tools instead of ornaments. When they reached the ranch, Clara dismounted before he could offer assistance. She surveyed the spread with a quick, measuring glance. "It's big," she said simply. "Too big for one man." Ethan nodded, throat tight. "That's why I sent for help." The words slipped out before he realized how bare they sounded, but Clara gave no sign she noticed. She only set her trunk down on the porch and asked, "Where do you want me?" Her directness disarmed him. He led her inside, the wooden floor creaking beneath their boots. The cabin smelled faintly of smoke and leather, a space shaped by a man who had lived too long alone. Clara set her satchel down and began to inspect the room without waiting for permission, opening shutters, tapping the table to test its sturdiness, running her hand across the mantel as if searching for dust. Ethan watched, caught between irritation and fascination. "You don't waste time," he muttered. "No point in it," she replied, glancing over her shoulder. "Life's short enough without dithering." That night, as Ethan prepared supper, the unease between them thickened. He placed beans and bread on the table, apologizing for the plainness of the meal. Clara sat, her face unreadable. After a few bites, she said, "It'll do. Better than many nights I've known." Ethan leaned back, studying her across the lamplight. He wanted to ask what those nights had been like, what road she had traveled to arrive here, but something in her expression kept him still. Instead, he asked, "Why me?" Clara met his gaze directly. "Because you were looking, and I was willing. That's all there is." Her bluntness stung, though he couldn't say why. Perhaps he had hoped she would speak of destiny, or at least affection carried in her letters. Instead, she spoke as though marriage were a bargain struck on hard ground. Yet beneath her words, Ethan thought he glimpsed weariness, the kind that comes from running too long. In the following days, Clara proved herself capable in ways that unsettled the neighbors. She split logs without complaint, repaired a broken hinge on the barn door, and drove a stray bull back into the pen with a lasso Ethan himself struggled to control. Word spread fast. Men at the saloon joked louder, calling her the husband of the ranch. Women whispered behind their hands, saying no man would want a bride built like an ox. Ethan bristled at the mockery, but Clara only smirked when he told her. "If they're talking, they're not shooting," she said. "I'll take the gossip." Still, he noticed the way she kept glancing toward the horizon at dusk, as if expecting someone, or dreading them. The thought gnawed at him. Her past was a locked chest, and he could only rattle the lid. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ethan ventured carefully, "What drove you to leave the life you knew?" Clara stared into the flames, the light etching shadows across her face. "Some places don't let you breathe. Some men don't let you live. I chose to keep breathing." The words hung between them, heavy and unyielding. Ethan felt the urge to ask more, but before he could, a sound reached him, a faint crunch of gravel outside, too deliberate for the wind. He stiffened, hand brushing the rifle propped by the door. Clara's eyes flicked toward the sound as well, sharp and certain. She did not look surprised. Instead, she whispered, "You hear it too?" Ethan nodded, pulse quickening. He rose slowly, every sense alert. The fire crackled, the silence beyond it pressing close. When he opened the door, the night greeted him with nothing but darkness and the whisper of dry grass. Yet in the dirt near the porch, faint prints marked the earth, boots, not his, not hers. He knelt, fingertips brushing the tracks. Fresh. Someone had been close, watching. When he turned back, Clara was standing in the doorway, her face unreadable, but her eyes glinting with something fierce. For the first time, Ethan wondered not just who she was, but who might be following her. The fire popped behind them, sending sparks into the night. Ethan straightened, the letter in his pocket forgotten, replaced by a different truth. Whatever Clara had left behind had found its way to his doorstep. And now it was his burden too. The following morning broke with a brittle chill, the kind that settled deep into the bones and made the land feel hostile. Ethan saddled his horse before dawn, uneasy from the prints he had seen in the dirt. Clara moved about the yard with calm precision, hauling water, stacking wood, her shoulders square as if nothing unusual had occurred. Yet when their eyes met, Ethan caught the glimmer of awareness. She knew, as he did, that someone had come close in the night. By midday the ranch bore signs of intrusion no one could mistake. A calf lay dead in the pasture, its throat cut and its hide marked with a crude slash. Ethan crouched by the carcass, jaw tight, the coppery stench of blood clogging the air. "Rustlers," he muttered, though the pattern told him otherwise. This was not theft. This was a warning. Clara stood a few steps away, her expression hard, but her fists clenched at her sides. That evening, while the prairie burned orange with sunset, Ethan tested the rifles, cleaning them with practiced care. Clara sat across from him, silent for a long while before finally speaking. "They found me," she said flatly. Ethan paused, the rag tightening in his grip. "Who?" She hesitated, her gaze lost in the firelight. "My stepbrother. His name's Virgil. Cruel man, crueler than most I've known. He owned nothing but his temper, and when my father died, he laid claim to everything else, including me. He tried to barter me to an outlaw gang in exchange for protection. Ethan stared, anger rising in his chest. Clara's voice did not falter, though her eyes grew distant. I fled before the deal could be struck. Took the first chance I had. A mail-order bride, they said, some man out west looking for a wife. It wasn't a dream. It was escape. The words sank into Ethan like stones in a river. He set down the rifle, his voice low. And now he's followed you. Clara gave a small nod. He doesn't forgive what he thinks is his. For a long stretch of silence, only the fire spoke, crackling and spitting. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He should have been angry with her for bringing this danger to his land, to his cattle, to his quiet life. Yet instead he felt the surge of something sharper, resolve. The following days tested them both. More cattle were harassed, fences cut, tools stolen. The air around the ranch grew thick with unease. But in the midst of it, Ethan began to see Clara not as a burden but as a partner forged by hardship. She worked beside him from dawn to dusk, never shying from labor. She carried water buckets with steady arms, fixed the porch rail when it split, even shot a rattler coiled near the hayloft with a single bullet between the eyes. Ethan could not ignore the steadiness in her hands, the calm way she faced tasks that made other men falter. One afternoon, a rifle cracked from the ridge above the pasture. The bullet sang past Ethan's shoulder, splintering the fence post behind him. He dove for cover, heart hammering, and returned fire. Clara was beside him in an instant, snatching the spare rifle and firing cleanly toward the ridge. Her aim was sure, her movement swift, and the shooters retreated before Ethan caught more than a shadow. Breathing hard, he turned to her. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" She shrugged, reloading with practiced ease. When a woman grows up in a house with a man like Virgil, she learns fast or she doesn't last. That night, under a sky thick with stars, Ethan felt the shift between them. Clara was no longer just the unexpected bride he had imagined turning away. She was flesh and grit and willpower, a survivor who carried scars invisible and otherwise. As they sat by the fire, he noticed how her laughter, rare but genuine, softened the hard lines of her face. It wasn't beauty in the delicate sense, but it struck him deeper than that, something resilient, something enduring. Neighbors began to take notice too. Some warned Ethan to rid himself of her before the trouble grew worse. Others whispered that she was cursed. Yet Ethan found he could no longer see his ranch without her in it. When she walked the fence line, hair pulled back against the wind, she looked like she belonged as much as the land itself. One evening, Clara confessed more of her story. She spoke of nights hiding from Virgil's rages, of the weight of his threats, of the desperate gamble she took by answering an ad for a husband. "I didn't think much of who I'd find," she admitted, voice raw. "I only thought of getting free." Ethan listened, his chest aching with both pity and admiration. "You're free now," he said. Her eyes met his, shadowed with doubt. "Not while he's still out there." The following dawn, riders appeared on the far ridge. Ethan spotted them first, 4 figures silhouetted against the pale light. They lingered like vultures, not approaching, not retreating. Clara stiffened beside him, her face pale beneath its resolve. "That's him," she whispered. Virgil Boone had found her. The riders turned away after a time, but Ethan knew it was no courtesy. It was promise. A storm was gathering, and it was aimed straight at his ranch. He laid a hand on Clara's shoulder, feeling the tension coiled in her muscles. "Then we'll be ready," he said. Clara's eyes glistened in the dawn light, not with fear but with something fiercer. "This time," she murmured, "I'm not running." And for the first time since she had stepped off that wagon, Ethan felt the stirrings of something unexpected, hope, bound to a woman who had brought both danger and a strength that matched his own. The ridge where the riders had stood still smoldered in his mind, a warning etched against the sky. He knew the real fight had yet to come. The attack came on a night when the wind howled like a wounded beast across the plains. Ethan had been dozing in his chair by the fire, rifle propped against the wall, when the first shot shattered the stillness. The window pane burst, shards of glass scattering across the floor. Clara was already on her feet, dragging the lamp down to snuff the light before another bullet could find its mark. Darkness swallowed the room, broken only by the orange glow of the hearth. "Out back," Ethan hissed, snatching up the rifle. Clara moved without hesitation, her boots silent on the boards. They slipped into the cold night, breath steaming, ears straining against the rush of wind. From the barn came the panicked bawling of cattle and the crash of splintering wood. Virgil Boone had chosen his moment well, under cover of storm and shadow. Figures on horseback thundered into the yard, torches flaring in their fists. Flames licked at the barn's roof as one of the outlaws hurled a torch onto the hay. Fire caught fast, crackling greedily, smoke curling into the starless sky. Ethan dropped to one knee, sighted, and fired. A rider pitched sideways, crashing into the dirt. Clara seized the second rifle, bracing it against her shoulder, her jaw tight with focus. Her shot tore through another torch, sending it spinning into the mud before it could reach the house. Gunfire answered from the dark. Bullets whined off the porch posts, splinters stinging Ethan's cheek. He pressed himself against the water trough, firing back in short bursts. Clara crouched beside him, reloading with practiced calm, the glow of the burning barn painting her features in fierce relief. Through the chaos, a voice carried, a deep, venomous drawl. "Clara, you think you can run forever? You think some fool rancher can keep you from me?" Virgil's words cut through the fire's roar. Clara's hands trembled for the first time, though not with fear. Her eyes flashed with fury, a storm breaking loose. "That man never owned me," she shouted, her voice rising above the gunfire. Then she pulled the trigger, the shot snapping the night in two. A rider near Virgil reeled backward, his horse bolting into the darkness. The outlaws regrouped, circling the house. Two dismounted and crept low, rifles ready. Ethan caught movement at the corner of his eye and swung around. The first intruder fired wild, missing by inches. Ethan's return shot struck true, dropping him where he stood. Clara handled the other with merciless precision, her bullet sending him sprawling into the dirt. The barn groaned as flames consumed its beams. Sparks rained across the yard, catching on the dry grass. The ranch was turning into a battlefield, every shadow an enemy, every heartbeat a gamble. Then Virgil himself stepped into the firelight. He was taller than Clara but carried the same hard jaw, the same relentless set of the eyes. His long coat whipped in the wind, his revolver gleaming. He smiled, though it looked more like a snarl. "You should have stayed where you belonged," he called. "Would have spared you both this misery." Ethan rose from behind the trough, rifle leveled. "She doesn't belong to you," he said, his voice carrying steady despite the pounding in his chest. Virgil's eyes narrowed. "And you think she belongs to you?" Clara stood then, shoulders squared, her rifle steady. "I belong to no man," she declared, her voice raw and sure. "Not you, not him. But I choose who I stand beside." She shifted closer to Ethan, the barrel of her gun trained on her stepbrother. For a heartbeat, the world hung suspended. Then the night erupted. Virgil fired, the shot tearing past Ethan's ear. Ethan squeezed the trigger in the same instant, his bullet grazing Virgil's coat. Clara's shot rang out a breath later, striking the ground at Virgil's boots and sending him stumbling. The fire roared higher, the horses screamed, and chaos spun tight around them. Virgil lunged forward, dragging Clara down in the dirt. Her rifle skittered away, lost in the smoke. Ethan charged, but another outlaw intercepted, slamming into him with brutal force. They grappled, fists crashing, mud flying. Ethan fought like a man defending more than land. He fought for Clara, for the promise she carried, for the life he had thought beyond his reach. With a final heave, he drove the outlaw's head into the trough, leaving him limp and still. Clara and Virgil rolled near the burning barn, embers raining around them. Virgil's hand clamped around her throat, pressing hard, but Clara drove her knee upward, knocking the breath from him. She seized a fallen board, swinging it with all her strength. The crack of wood against bone echoed, and Virgil reeled back, cursing. Ethan stumbled toward them, rifle raised. Virgil staggered to his feet, eyes wild, revolver trembling in his grip. "I'll see you both buried for this," he spat. Before Ethan could fire, Clara snatched up her rifle from the dirt. She fired once, clean and sure. Virgil jerked, the revolver falling from his hand, his knees buckling as the firelight flickered across his face. He collapsed without another word. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall, broke and fled into the night, their shouts fading into the wind. Silence returned slowly, broken only by the crackle of flames and the heaving of labored breaths. Ethan turned, eyes locking on Clara. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, soot streaking her face, but her gaze was steady. The barn was lost, but the house stood. The cattle, scattered but alive, bawled in the distance. The ranch would endure. Ethan lowered his rifle, stepping close to her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Clara whispered, almost disbelieving, "It's done." Ethan reached for her hand, rough fingers closing around hers. "You're free," he said softly. Clara's eyes glistened, but her chin lifted, defiant even in relief. "Not because you saved me," she replied, her voice trembling but strong. "Because I stood and fought." Ethan's chest tightened with something more than pride. He saw her then not as the stranger who had stepped off the wagon, not as the woman mocked by the town, but as the partner he had never dared imagine. Together they turned toward the smoking ruins of the barn, dawn's first pale light cresting over the ridge. The land smelled of ash and blood, but also of renewal. A new day had come, and with it, a bond neither had expected but both had fought to claim. Ethan tightened his arm around Clara's shoulders, guiding her toward the porch. The world would whisper about them still, but let it whisper. The woman who had shocked everyone had become the one who saved him. And as the first rays of sunlight struck the ranch, Ethan knew he was no longer alone.